I think the way in which I'm going to try to approach filming these videos is much less trying to pressure myself to be able to figure out everything that I want to say in a 15-minute sprint, and rather letting my mind start to wander, get warmed up with what I'm saying, and then kind of launch into a series of speaking. Because there's a reason why a sprinter has to warm up before a race. That's to get the body into the mode of being able to sprint or being able to move very quickly. I think the same has to do with creative output, with creative ability and the means by which you speak and have ideas and share information. It takes a little bit of time to really dig into what's going on in my mind and how do I explain that effectively and productively. Taking some of the pressure off my shoulders of, oh, you have to think of something right now to say, you have to get the dialogue going, you have to, you're recording, you're wasting time. I saw a tweet, Mr. Beast recorded 50,000 hours of footage for a video, and that was cut down to 20 minutes. So there's really no pressure. The creativity pipeline, as we talked about, is about simply just saying whatever comes to mind, because once you're able to start that process of just getting anything that comes to mind out, that's when your mind starts to actually mull over the information of, okay, this is not actually what I want to talk about, or this isn't actually the information that I have a breadth of understanding about that I think is valuable to share with an audience. Something that I have been thinking about and something that I was doing yesterday was when I was editing the video. So I started out only about a week ago, and I said I wanted to take a more authentic feel to the videos and just raw record and talk. But what I've realized is that if I want to have or to make, I think, videos with more mass appeal, my skill set is more in the construction of a medium. And with these videos, what I noticed when I was editing yesterday was that the way that I was speaking and the way that it sounded, the dialogue, came across as a product on its own. And it was more about the way that it sounded and the way that it was being presented to the viewer than the actual content of the words that I think had some value in it. And a phrase that keeps occurring to me, I was watching my own video and it kind of had my brain in a chokehold. This very quick form of editing that really leaves no space for any type of lull, or it's a very engaging way to present information to someone. And that's interesting. So I think there's two aspects to these videos. One is the actual content of what I'm saying and how that can provide value. And the second is the actual medium in which it is being presented and the way that it's edited. I'm not going to give away all the tricks and things that I've learned over the years to make videos more engaging, but it oddly feels like an extension of when I was editing Comment Awards and how that got to be sort of formulaic, and it was a medium. It was a kind of medium of content. And when I say medium, what I mean is the format in which it's presented is actually part of the entertainment value or part of the experience itself. So the medium is the message was a phrase coined by Marshall McLuhan, and to me that's always really resonated because it's often the ways in which we decide to consume content or the ways in which it is presented to us that actually informs the message, the true message of the content and the way that it's being seen by the audience. And what I mean by this exactly is, let's say we go back to the 1960s, 1970s when TVs were our typically main source of entertainment and media, and the message is that actually there were a couple hundred channels maybe that existed, and that thin pipeline actually represented a smaller number of people that had access to be able to present that media to people. And so the message is actually that the kind of content that flowed through those pipes was less democratized than it is now. And it's actually the aspect of democratization that informs the way that we think, because in 1970 there was no TikTok, there was no YouTube, there was no way to access content that was more niche or maybe catered to more esoteric interests. And I think that's important. The way in which we decide to consume content informs the way that we think. You see the shortened attention spans of people, and I think this echoes back to the way that I'm starting to edit these videos, which is that it's not simply about the content that's being presented and what I'm actually saying. It's also about how it's being edited and how that will change the way that things can be thought about. I read something super interesting the other day about how when we look surprised, the reason that we look surprised is when we go like this, because we're alarmed or we need more information about a scenario. The reason we open our eyes wider is because it lets more light into our eyes and it gives us more information about our surrounding environment. And that infinitesimally small extra amount of light gives us more information. It's fascinating to me that over millions of years of evolution, that small characteristic and that look has led to a better rate of survival for those people who have adopted it into how they react to situations. And it's fascinating that everything that we do in a Darwinian perspective, so this is Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, is from the standpoint of better survivability chances. And every aspect of the way that we've developed as people and everything that we do in some sense is our brains are oriented to be better survival machines. The ways that we look at the world are designed for survival, pretty much. What is the most efficient way that we can survive? And the fact that we even recognize that surprise on someone else's face is an action taken to better increase the odds of surviving a situation where the nanoseconds count. Let's say there's a tiger crouching in the bushes and opening your eyes gives you a few more millimeters of sight or understanding about your current scenario. It's fascinating to me that even as we perceive that on other people's faces, the reason that we perceive that as surprise is because we also understand at a very subconscious level that that's a mechanic to survive. And value in this context takes on a very interesting role, because if you look at what is actually valuable to human beings in a Darwinian perspective, we value things that better increase our chances of survival. And I think this is an important perspective to incorporate when thinking about how you want to work and how you want to create value in the marketplace. And it's to understand, what do people value? What do they find interesting or useful to their survival and their continuation of their own personal journey? And there are certain mechanisms that are very primal in our brain. Actually, most of our brain's development through the millions of years of history that it's developed, only in the last few hundred years have we hit this tipping point where technology has kind of exploded in terms of its ability to satisfy these primal urges, let's say. And we live in a very, very strange time because our brains have not even started to be close to catching up to evolving to properly compensate for the landscape that we currently live in. I mean, our brains really have no concept of how technology is working. For instance, the concept of chips or candy or butter even. Butter is so tasty to people and it's such a good additive for cooking because our brain values fat. Our brain values high calorie, high density foods because through the millions of years of evolution, those types of foods were able to sustain us for longer periods of times, but they typically occurred in very rare fashion. And we've gotten to a point where technology has been able to serve us with a lot of the basic mechanics that human beings need for survival, like food and shelter. And we've gotten to a point where society is about actually being able to push away from this kind of stuff and learning that it's not necessarily good to be constantly engaging with unhealthy foods or what our brain perceives as healthy, because when you taste them, it's delicious, but in mass quantities are not healthy. So society is in a very interesting spot where value is a very relative concept, because what our brains intrinsically value is not what is necessarily good for us long term. So it's important to incorporate that, especially when it comes to health and well-being. I think another form of value besides just food and shelter and stuff is novel ideas and information. And I think this is where the internet is really excelling, and the information age that we live in now is starting to really accelerate the way that we think, because information itself, it's incredibly valuable for evolution and operating on a basis that lets us more efficiently go about our life and live life on the terms that we dictate. And obviously this is all within the scope of succeeding on an evolutionary scale. Information is an incredibly interesting one because information can be omnidirectional. Let's say I offer someone a perspective and they take that perspective and then they extrapolate that and they're able to apply it to a bunch of different areas of their life. It's super interesting how in this information age, things that are valuable are seen as things that can bring us novel ideas. For instance, ChatGPT is something that has an enormous amount of ability to expose us to new and interesting ideas and perspectives that we can filter in and then make use of. And information is like food. We have to be cautious about the kind of information that we decide to consume and the way that it affects the way that we think. And just as it's better to consume foods that are good for our health, I think it's also important to consume information and content that's good for our mental health. And we're at the beginning, really, of the information age, and platforms like YouTube are only 15 or so years old, and there's really no governance or understanding about how content can affect the ways that we think and operate in the world and how it affects our mental health over a long period of time. Because again, this stuff has come about so quickly. So I think it's important that keeping an eye on the kind of content we decide to consume is important, and making sure that that is healthy at some level is a personal choice, but I think it's a good one. Anyway, that's going to be it for this video, but I really appreciate you watching, and have a great rest of your day. Peace.